Mike, a U.S. Marine, says goodbye to his girlfriend Jenny at the airport before heading to North Africa on a special assignment. 3 months later, Mike and his spotter Tommy are still in the African desert, perched on a cliff above their assassination target. Eventually, they notice two groups of individuals arriving from different directions, one on foot, the other in an armed convoy. The groups meet in the center, and Tommy and his commanding officer over the radio urge Mike to take the shot, but he hesitates. It appears to be a lovely family reunion rather than a terrorist making business. Mike then learns it's a wedding and targets the groom's father, who is now standing behind the newlyweds. He informs his commanding officer of the situation and receives orders to kill the groom in order to reach their target simultaneously, but Mike refuses to mercilessly kill a civilian and lies to his commanding officer, claiming he has lost the target. A glare from the sniper scope alerts the guards at the ceremony to their location, and they open fire immediately. Mike fires a few shots back before fleeing with Tommy, while the guards hurry to remove their boss from the scene. Some of the guards begin to approach Mike and Tommy in their cars, forcing the two to jump and roll down the hill. They flee behind a rocky formation, and Tommy calls his commanding officer to request assistance, but his GPS is broken, and he cannot provide their specific location. As the enemy approaches, Mike shoots at the hill to divert their attention. Suddenly, their adversaries flee as a sandstorm approaches. Mike and Tommy decide to use it as cover and go through it while Tommy places another call. His commanding officer directs them to a settlement 5 hours to the west, where they will be picked up. Eventually, the two manage to get out of the storm and begin walking under the scorching desert heat. Tommy is always talking and sharing stories about his son and wife at home, but Mike remains silent. Frustrated, Tommy remarks that something is clearly eating Mike on the inside and inquires about Jenny, pondering the possibilities of marriage. Mike explains that he wants to marry her but can't yet since it's too complicated. Moments later, they receive a transmission on the radio informing them that the main crew has encountered issues and that a new pickup location has been picked, requiring the two to cross the desert to get there. Because of the dunes, the radio will not always function, so they will have to exercise extra caution. After a long trek, Mike and Tommy face the sandstorm again and decide to wait it out. They spot a man with a child on the end of a rope walking through the storm, but they don't appear to notice them, so the couple does not shoot. As the wind blows, a caution sign falls from its pole. Tommy and Mike continue walking under the blazing heat once the sandstorm has passed. Suddenly, the warning sign appears directly in front of Mike's feet. He can't read it, but the skull clearly signifies danger, and he recalls that the United States had planted a lot of landmines in this region. Tommy, on the other hand, believes Mike is taking it too seriously and explains that it is a ruse used by the natives to keep adversaries away from their communities. Tommy also points out that turning back risks dying of thirst, so he keeps going, convinced that the sign indicates the settlement is close. After a few hours of trekking, Mike freezes when he steps on something, but it's simply a small toy soldier. He stores it in his vest before realizing Tommy is out of water, so he shares his own. Tommy, desperate to keep the mood up, begins walking backward while mocking Mike about overthinking things. Suddenly, Mike hears a click and attempts to warn his friend, but it's too late. Tommy takes another step, and a landmine explodes. Mike takes a stride closer to Tommy while his ears ring, only to hear another click. He freezes in shock when he discovers he is standing on top of a landmine that cannot be moved without activating it. When the sand from the explosion settles, Mike notices Tommy has survived but has lost both legs. He can't stop screaming in pain and pleading for help, so Mike yells back to calm him down and explain the issue. Tommy, guided by Mike, tries to reach for his backpack containing the radio, but the pain is too intense. His attitude worsens as he looks down and realizes he is without his legs, which causes him to stress out. Mike soothes him down by reminding him of his family and the medical injections they have in their vest. Tommy instantly takes both rather than storing one for later, as Mike suggests. Tommy attempts again for the bag, and this time he gets it, but the radio isn't working. Mike, desperate, considers stepping away from the landmine because it could be old or broken. However, the risk is significant, and Tommy wants him to live, so he pulls out his gun and requests that Mike transmit his love to his son before self-deleting. Mike yells in fury and anguish, but soon stops himself since he realizes screaming out will cause him to collapse. Then he cautiously lowers his body till he's on one knee, using his knife to gently move the sand. He discovers some circular metal under his feet, confirming his position on top of a landmine. Unbeknownst to Mike, a man is watching from a distance but leaves without helping. Mike then combines his shoelaces, the strap from his rifle, and his axe to form a hook. He throws it a few times in an attempt to retrieve the bag, but it does not reach far enough. Moving carefully again, Mike rises up and nearly falls while throwing the axe, but he recovers just in time. He can eventually bring the bag toward him and grab the radio, only to find that the battery is dead and the spare is in Tommy's vest. At least the radio can be charged by the sun, so he leaves the little panel on the ground to charge. Mike then keeps himself busy by looking through his supplies. A few hours later, the radio finally charges, and Mike can speak with his commanding officer, describing the situation and seeking extraction. However, the officer is dissatisfied with the mission's failure, and Mike, who lacks GPS and already has one leg in the realm of death, is not deemed a high priority. Mike will have to wait 52 hours for a convoy to pick him up because helicopters are unable to fly due to sandstorms. Mike is unsure he can last that long, but he has no choice but to set a timer on his watch. The commanding officer informs him that many mines are old and broken, and that there is a trench technique to deal with this issue, but the communication is cut off before he can finish explaining. A few hours later, Mike consumes some of his rations and realizes he doesn't have much left. The sandstorm returns, so Mike hurriedly covers his face, takes his belongings, and leans over to remain as still as possible against the wind. Mike's body trembles violently, but he perseveres and avoids igniting the mine. After the storm has passed, Mike glances around and notices that the wind has pushed Tommy's body right next to him. After covering his friend's face with his hat, he opens the vest pocket and discovers a photo of Tommy's family. He waits a minute for silence before snatching the batteries. Unfortunately, the wind has blown the bag too far, and he is now unable to access the radio. The gloomy irony makes Mike laugh. Mike's only option as time passes is to wait. He covers his head to protect it from the sun and swallows the last of the water. In desperation, he fires a couple shots into the sky and cries for rescue, but to no avail. He begins to consider self-deleting as his only choice, but then he notices a Berber man passing by. Mike raises his revolver at him and orders him to stop, but the Berber ignores him and continues to move. Mike makes exploding noises to signal this is a landmine region, assuming he does not know English, but the Berber mocks him. The man then begins to walk toward Mike in a zigzag style. Suddenly, he asks why Mike is stuck, demonstrating that he understands English. Mike explains the problem as he continues to ask for water and the radio, but the Berber mocks him for not moving. He takes his flask but does not assist with the radio. He simply leaves, ignoring Mike's screams and wondering if his strange motions help him dodge mines. Hours later, Mike forces himself to pee in a bag to drink. He hardly takes a sip when a young girl appears, racing toward him in the same zigzag fashion. She gives Mike his flask of water, which he drinks because he believes she is the Berber man's daughter. The girl then pulls out a toy soldier from her bag, and Mike shows her the one he found in return, so she uses them to represent him and Tommy. Without saying anything, she pushes the toy to inform Mike he needs to move on. Mike claims he can't move and begins calling for the radio without intending to, so the girl simply departs. Later, as the sun begins to set, Mike plays some music on his phone and makes a fire. He can hear animals howling in the distance, so he distracts himself by looking at images of Jenny on his phone and viewing a movie she produced specifically for his departure as a good luck charm. The fire eventually burns out, and Mike falls asleep while glancing at his watch. His father appears in front of him and hits him, bringing up memories of abuse he experienced as a child. This forces him to wake up just before falling. Then Mike tries to restart his fire, but he hears the snarling of wild dogs approaching. He begins shooting in the dark, but none of his bullets connect. He decides to use the flashlight and discovers that one of the wild dogs is snatching Tommy's bag and another is approaching him. After changing firearms, he fires again, injuring the dog. As the creature takes a step back, it activates a landmine, causing an explosion that scares the pack away. The next day, the Berber pays Mike another visit, congratulating him on his survival thus far. The Berber explains that he has no idea where the landmines are and is simply walking in this manner to improve his chances. He believes Mike is terrified of moving on physically because he is unable to do so in his soul, and he questions why Mike became a soldier, to which Mike responds that he no longer has any reasons to stay. At least this time, the Berber brings over the radio, and Mike immediately replaces the battery, but it still does not function. The Berber then grabs Mike's face and orders him to be free. This prompts Mike to imagine the man as Tommy, telling him to live, but when he blinks, the Berber is gone. Mike cuts his boot after a few hours since his foot is red and swollen. He also uses his knife to eliminate a scorpion. When the heat gets too severe, he takes off his vest. It is evident that the entire event is hurting him mentally. He begins to have hallucinations and interacts with them as if they were real, yelling at them, punching them, and even shrieking in frustration. Every time this happens, a clicking sound is heard. He even notices Tommy's body standing up and proclaiming that they are heading home, but he swiftly vanishes. In the evening, Mike continues to attempt to reach the base, but Tommy's hallucination informs him that he is only dying the battery. At that point, his phone begins to ring, and Mike recognizes it as a call from his father, prompting Tommy to point out that it is not real. Mike snaps and pushes Tommy away, and Tommy reminds him that this is because Mike has never confronted his inner issues. Mike claims that leaving Jenny makes him as horrible as his father, but Tommy tells him that he isn't. A flashback reveals that Mike asked Jenny to marry him, but she declined because she believed he needed to heal himself first. In the present, Mike is about to fall asleep when the wild dogs return. They set off a mine and move away from the blast, but this time they do not leave. Mike shoots in the dark ahead of him, but Tommy warns him to be careful. A dog approaches him from the side and bites his arm, prompting Mike to shoot it. Then Tommy persuades him to attempt the technique his commanding officer recommended, and Mike begins to dig in the sand. Unfortunately, the dogs attack and drive Mike away before he finishes the trench, causing the mine to explode and injure him. As he collapses, Mike blinks and discovers the explosion was a hallucination, but the hounds are indeed attacking. Determined to live, he pulls his knife and begins killing them one by one, sustaining multiple bite wounds in the process. Throughout the struggle, he keeps remembering the times he was punched in the past. By daybreak, all of the dogs have died, and Mike has survived. At that point, the radio finally functions, and Mike finds that the convoy has been delayed due to an attack, and he will be picked up in 17 hours. Knowing Mike's odds of survival are slim, the base connects him to Jenny, and he immediately apologizes for destroying everything he touches while she is in front of him. The communication ends before Jenny can respond, and Mike eventually goes out, but he is caught by the Berber just in time. While the man applies ointment to Mike's wounds, he tells that a landmine took his leg, displaying his wooden one. He had been terrified in the hospital, but a nurse showed him enough sympathy to keep him going, and she finally became his wife. The Berber then forces Mike to swallow some medicine, warning him that it will relieve his discomfort but exacerbate his hallucinations. Mike mentions the little girl, but the Berber confesses that he was the one who brought him the flask. His daughter perished when the mine stole his leg, so he now has only 3 sons. They used to gather mines to sell to rebels, and the daughter was an expert at retrieving them and replacing them with old cans. The Berber believes he is not as fortunate as Mike, but at least he is freed because he learned to move on. After the man leaves, Mike notices his daughter strolling by his side. Suddenly, the medication takes effect, and Mike sees the walls of his childhood home emerge from the ground. He opens the door, and his child self arrives, watching his father be terribly abusive with his mother. When his father observed him, he declared he'd teach him to be a man and punched him. Mike briefly returns to reality after being hit, but the flashbacks immediately resume. He sees his happy life with Jenny, but a clicking sound triggers a recollection of his mother in a hospital bed. Mike had fled his home in dread and left his mother with his father, landing her in the hospital. Another flashback depicts Tommy and Mike at a bar, watching 2 men mistreat a waitress who turned out to be Jenny. Mike, furious, rushed to her aid and began beating up the guys with all of his pent-up rage. The hallucinations resurface, and his father appears to punch him. Mike's thoughts alternate between the desert and the memories of his mother dying in the hospital, which makes him feel terrible to this day. Tommy's vision ultimately snaps him out of it, alerting him to the approaching caravan. A person on the radio attempts to contact him as well, but Mike's dry throat prevents him from speaking clearly. He attempts to wave his hand, but he is too far away to see. Then Tommy reminds him of the smoke grenade, and as Mike is about to take it, he is shot by an opponent hidden in the dunes. A bleeding Mike bends over and finally clutches the smoke grenade, but before he can detonate it, the adversary shoots again, forcing him to drop it. As Mike fires back, memories of disagreements with Jenny and his departure flood his head. He shoots as many adversaries as he can before his ammunition runs out. His father reappears, and Mike recalls his mother urging him to let her go. Mike, confused and overwhelmed, points his rifle at his father, who pushes him to do so. However, he remembers Jenny and how he asked her out after the brawl at the pub, and he decides to be good to her by not shooting. His father holds him as he remembers Jenny's hug, allowing him to finally go on. The convoy won't be here much longer, and the grenade isn't close enough. Mike recalls the Berber's words and cautiously moves away from the mine, but nothing happens. Shocked, he digs out the mine, only to realize that it had always been one of the girl's cans. Inside the can, he discovers a miniature soldier. Mike laughs with joy as he finally grabs the grenade, igniting it just in time for the convoy to find and rescue him. Sometime later, a healed Mike returns to the United States and reunites with Jenny, eager to begin a new life for her.